The air in the cabin was thick with the scent of pine and sweat, but tonight it was laced with something else. Fear. Eliza stood silhouetted against the moonlight, slanting through the unfinished window, the cold weight of a carving knife in her hand. Outside, a twig snapped. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the vast silence of the prairie. Her daughter, Rose, slept soundly in a makeshift crib, oblivious to the shadow that had been haunting their fence line for days. The voice that cut through the night was slick with false concern, a serpent's whisper. "Eliza, you were supposed to be gone by winter." It was Silas Kane, the man whose greed was as wide and empty as the plains. "I come to remind you, that land, your husband owed it, and I bought the debt." Eliza's knuckles turned white around the knife handle. She didn't move, didn't breathe. He thought she was a scared rabbit, a fragile widow to be chased off. He was wrong. She wasn't the woman who had been cast out. She was the woman who had clawed her way back, board by board, nail by nail. And she would be damned if she let any man take it from her. This wasn't just land. It was defiance. Part 1. The Reckoning. 6 days. It had been 6 days since she'd buried Daniel, since the earth had swallowed the only man she'd ever loved. Now, his brothers stood before her, their faces carved from the same cold stone as the mountains that loomed over the valley. The oldest, Jebediah, spat a wad of tobacco near her worn boots. "The ranch is ours now, Eliza. Daniel left no will, no claim in your name." "This was my home," she whispered, her voice raw with grief. She clutched her 6-month-old daughter, Rose, tighter. The baby, sensing her mother's distress, began to wail, a piercing cry that cut through the morning chill. "You were his wife," the other brother, Marcus, sneered. "Not ours. You have an hour." They didn't even let her pack a second blanket. One man carried her trunk to the edge of the ranch, dropped it in the dust, and walked away without a word. The others stood in a line like spectators to a well-rehearsed cruelty, their faces tight-lipped, ashamed not of their actions, but of how loud her baby cried as she was pushed through the wooden gate. Eliza didn't beg. Not once. She turned her back on the sprawling ranch, on the life she had known, and faced the dusty trail leading to the town of Crimson Creek. The town wasn't far, but her boots were cracked, and Rose was hot with a rising fever. Each step was an act of will, a silent rebellion against the injustice that had shattered her world. Dust rose around her, coating her black morning dress in a film of gray. Wagons rumbled past, their drivers averting their eyes. The saloon doors stayed closed, the general store's windows shuttered as if her grief were a contagious disease. She was invisible, a ghost haunting the edge of their comfortable lives. By dusk, she reached the fringe of town and collapsed on a hollow patch of land. It was a place of endings. A few gnarled stumps, the rotted frame of what had once been a shed, choked by weeds. She curled her body around Rose, her own exhaustion a flimsy shield against the cold. The sky was a vast, merciless canvas, and the stars blinked down like cold, distant judges. That night, she didn't cry. Tears were a luxury she couldn't afford. With hands trembling from exhaustion, she built a small fire. She held Rose through every cough, every shiver, every breathless gasp. In the silence between the gusts of wind, Eliza whispered into her daughter's ear, her words a fierce promise. "I don't care if they took everything. They didn't take you, and I will build you a world, little Rose. I swear it." The next morning, she found a broken axe head buried in the weeds, and a pile of rotted boards half covered by vines. She wiped Rose's face clean with the corner of her dress, then stood. Her back ached, her soul felt hollowed out, but as she picked up the heavy, handleless axe, something new took root in the barren soil of her grief. Resolve. It was the kind of resolve you build when the world tries to erase you, and you decide, with gritted teeth, to write your name back into the earth with your own 2 hands. The first swing of the axe against splintered wood was a declaration of war. Part 2. Forged in dust and splinters. The days bled into one another, measured not by the sun, but by the rhythm of her labor. Hammer, saw, lift, repeat. By the fourth day, her hands were a geography of pain. Blisters had formed, broken, and bled, leaving the skin raw. Her nails were chipped and split. A deep ache settled into her bones, a constant companion that made every breath feel like a shard of glass. But she didn't stop. She scavenged like a coyote, finding rusted nails in the dirt, leftover fence wire in a collapsed trough, and a hammerhead wedged in a pile of stone. No handle, just cold, heavy metal. She wrapped it in a strip of cloth torn from her petticoat and struck anyway. With every thud of metal against wood, she forged a mantra. This isn't for them. This is for her. Rose's fever had broken, but a cough lingered, and every whimper from the baby sent a surge of desperate energy through Eliza's veins. There were no walls yet, just a leaning skeleton of upright beams lashed together with rope from her trunk. The roof was a patchwork of old canvas she'd found buried under the shed remains, weighed down with rocks and her own stubbornness. It was a pathetic structure, a testament to ruin, but it was hers. On the sixth morning, she carried Rose in a sling on her chest while she tried to lift a heavy beam onto her shoulder. Her knees buckled. The weight was too much. She sank to the ground, the beam crashing beside her, a wave of despair washing over her. Just as a sob caught in her throat, a rider appeared on the ridge. He sat tall on a powerful black horse, a silhouette against the morning sun. The silver star on his chest caught the light. Sheriff Cole Blackwood, dat. He didn't ride down. He just watched, his expression unreadable from a distance. He was a man known for his silence and the cold intensity of his gaze. Eliza felt his eyes on her, a weight as heavy as the beam she couldn't lift. She felt exposed, her failure laid bare for him to witness. Pride, hot and sharp, surged through her. She gritted her teeth, got to her feet, and ignored him. She grabbed the beam again, her muscles screaming in protest, and with a guttural cry, she heaved it into place. She didn't look up to see if he was still there. She didn't care. She was used to being seen and not helped. That night, she mashed beans from her meager stores into a paste, feeding Rose with her fingertip. "I know it ain't much," she whispered, her voice hoarse, "but it's ours." The baby smiled, a fleeting, gummy grin, and for Eliza, it was like the sun breaking through the clouds. It was enough. The next day, a hard, punishing rain came. Eliza wrapped Anna in every dry scrap she had, stood over her with her arms outstretched, and took the storm like a personal affront. The sky could beat her, but it would not break her. When the rain stopped, she was soaked, shivering, but smiling through her teeth. "I'm still here," she whispered to the wind. It was later that week that Sheriff Blackwood rode by again. This time, he came closer. He stopped his horse just beyond the crude line she'd carved in the dirt for a fence. He didn't dismount. "Ma'am," he said, his voice a low baritone that seemed to vibrate in the air. He tipped his hat, his eyes scanning the structure. They were the color of a stormy sky, and they missed nothing. Eliza just nodded, her hand resting on the handle of her hammer. "That's ambitious work," he said, a hint of something. Surprise? Respect? In his tone. "It'll do," she replied, her voice flat. He was silent for a long moment, his gaze lingering on her blistered hands, then on Rose cooing on a blanket nearby. A strange tension crackled between them. It wasn't hostility, but an intense, unspoken awareness. It was the meeting of two solitary forces in a world that crushed the weak. "The world ain't kind to people out here on their own," he finally said, his words a statement, not a question. "I'm not on my own," Eliza said, her eyes flashing as she glanced at Rose. "And I'm not asking for its kindness." A flicker of something, a ghost of a smile, touched his lips. He nodded slowly, a silent acknowledgement. Then, without another word, he turned his horse and rode away, leaving Eliza with the unsettling feeling of having been seen, truly seen, for the first time since Daniel's death. Part 3. Whispers and Offerings. She didn't see who left the first bundle. She just woke one morning to find it tied in a ragged cloth at the base of a fence post, a bar of soap, 2 potatoes, and a wooden spoon. Eliza stared at it, her heart pounding with suspicion. She expected a trick, a condition, a cruel joke. But there was nothing. Just a quiet offering left without expectation. She took it inside, her throat tight with an emotion she couldn't name, and kept building. But it happened again. A scrap of oilcloth one morning, a tin of dried beans the next. Once, a pair of baby shoes that fit Rose almost perfectly. Someone was watching. The same townspeople who'd shuttered their windows now saw the smoke from her fire each night and couldn't look away. Their shame was becoming a quiet currency of kindness. Still, no one spoke to her. She was the woman who'd been cast out and hadn't died. That made her dangerous to the story they told themselves about the way the world worked. One afternoon, a group of children wandered near the tree line, watching her hammer with wide, curious eyes. One whispered, "Mama says she's gone mad with grief." Another, a boy with a smudge of dirt on his nose, replied, "My pa says she's got more grit than any man in Crimson Creek." The next morning, a basket appeared, filled with eggs and a folded note. 4 words in a child's crooked hand, for the baby too. Eliza sat with the note in her lap long after Rose had fallen asleep, her fingers tracing the letters like scripture. A few days later, a woman walked up the path. She was about Eliza's age, dressed in worn but clean clothes, with books clutched to her chest. "I'm Miss Eleanor Vance," she said, her voice gentle. "I teach the school in town. I heard you have a little one. I thought she might need stories, words someday." Eliza's defenses were up. "Are you here to teach her or to judge me?" Eleanor didn't flinch. "Maybe both. Teaching is like that. But mostly, I came because you're doing something right, and folks in town are starting to wonder what they missed." She set a small hand-stitched book on a stump. "The world should meet your daughter with more than silence." That night, by the fire, Eliza read to Rose, her voice cracking as she formed words she hadn't spoken in months. She wasn't just building a shelter, she was building a life with room for light and language. The following week, Sheriff Blackwood returned. This time he dismounted. The casual power in his movement was mesmerizing. He walked to the edge of her cabin, his presence filling the small clearing. "Some folks are starting to talk," he said, his voice low. He wasn't looking at her, but at the notches she'd carved into a beam, one for each day since she'd been cast out. "Let them," she said, not looking up from the plank she was sanding. "They say you're a danger." Her head snapped up at that, her eyes locking with his. The air crackled. "To who?" His gaze was intense, searching. "To the way things are," he replied, his voice barely a murmur. "You prove too much, that a woman doesn't need a husband or a brother or town's permission to exist." He took a step closer. The scent of leather and dust, and something uniquely him reached her. "They said you'd come crawling back. They don't know what a woman does when her child is all she's got." A long silence fell, broken only by Rose's soft babble. He was too close. His presence was a fire, and she had been living in the cold for so long. She could feel a wild, reckless heat stirring within her, a feeling she thought had been buried with Daniel. It was terrifying. It was intoxicating. "You should be careful, Eliza," he said softly, his eyes dropping to her lips for a fraction of a second before meeting her gaze again. "I am always careful, Sheriff," she breathed. "No," he countered, a wry, sad smile touching his lips. "You're brave. That's far more dangerous." He turned and left before she could form a reply, leaving her heart pounding with a rhythm that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with him. Part 4. The Fever and the Flood. The fever came in the night like a thief. One moment, Rose was giggling at shadows on the ceiling. The next, her small body was burning, her breath ragged. Panic, cold and sharp, seized Eliza. She moved like a storm, boiling water, grinding willow bark, her hands shaking. But nothing worked. The wet cloths turned warm in seconds. The air in the cabin seemed to choke her. She held her child, whispering frantic, Nonsensical stories, begging the earth not to take her only light. Morning brought no mercy. Eliza's legs gave way, and she stayed on the cabin floor, cradling her daughter, her soul clawing at the silence. Then, footsteps. The door curtain was pushed aside, and Eleanor Vance rushed in, breathless, a basket in her arms. "I heard," she said simply. "They talk." She knelt, touched Rose's forehead, and her face grew grim. "She needs more than bark and prayers. Come." Eliza didn't argue. She wrapped Rose in a blanket and followed Eleanor, barefoot, through the frost-bitten grass, past judgmental porches and narrow-eyed glances, straight into town. Eleanor led her not to the schoolhouse, but to her own home. Inside, a man with gray hair and soft hands waited. "My brother," Eleanor explained. "A doctor, trained in places this town pretends don't exist." He worked in silence, his movements efficient and calm. Hours passed like lifetimes. Then Rose coughed. A wet, deep, painful sound. But it was the sound of life. By evening, her fever broke. Eliza didn't cry until she felt her daughter's tiny fingers grip hers again. Eleanor handed her a piece of bread. "You built something too strong to lose now," she whispered. Eliza nodded, holding Rose close. That night, sitting by the hearth of another woman's home, she realized something profound. People didn't just fear what she was building. Some were praying it would last. The day after the fever broke, the knocks didn't stop. First, a woman with a limp left a sack of flour. Then 2 boys, barely 12, asked if they could help mend her broken step. Then came a man, tall and rough around the edges. "Name's Jedediah Stone," he said, scuffing his boot in the dirt. "Got a sawmill up near Bitter Ridge. Heard you need help framing that roof proper. I don't talk much, but I can build." "Why?" Eliza asked, her voice thick with suspicion and exhaustion. He looked down. "Because someone once helped me when I had nothing. Don't reckon I should let that go to waste." That afternoon, Jedediah started work. By evening, others had joined. A quiet flood of support had been unleashed. They were drawn not to a charity case, but to a symbol. It wasn't about the cabin anymore. It was about the woman who had stood when she was supposed to fold. Sheriff Blackwood rode out 2 days later. He found not a lone woman struggling, but a small, bustling worksite. Jedediah was on the roof, hammering beams into place. Eleanor was tending a small garden patch. The boys were fixing the fence. Cole stopped his horse, his face an unreadable mask. But Eliza saw a flicker of something in his eyes as he watched Jedediah direct the work. Was it relief? Or was it something closer to jealousy? He walked over to her, his long coat dusting the ground. "Looks like you've started a town of your own out here. Just finishing a home," she said, her gaze steady. "A home needs protecting," he said, his voice low and for her ears only. "Not all threats come with the weather, Eliza." His warning hung in the air, a premonition. His concern felt like a brand on her skin, a possessive heat that both thrilled and terrified her. He wanted to protect her, but she had learned to be her own fortress. The conflict was a wild river raging between them, and she didn't know if she wanted to build a bridge or let herself be swept away. Part 5. The Serpent's Shadow. It began with a shadow near the fence, too stiff to be a deer, too silent to be a neighbor. Then, small acts of malice. Her firewood stack kicked down. Rose's blanket found draped across a thorny bush. Fear, cold and familiar, tried to coil around her heart. But this time, it sharpened her. She tested the lock she'd crafted from scrap iron and slept with a carving knife under her pillow. Some ghosts had to be faced alone. The knock came on the 5th night. Soft, measured, almost polite. She didn't open the door. "Eliza," the voice said, a serpent's whisper through the wood. "It's Jonas. Silas Kane. You remember me." Her stomach turned. Silas Kane, her husband's former business partner. A man with a soul as barren as the salt flats. He was the one who'd shown up 2 days after the funeral to take the last of the tools, claiming Daniel owed him money. "You were supposed to be gone by winter," he called, his voice laced with mock concern. "I come to remind you. That land, your husband owed it, and I bought the debt. You got no claim." Her fingers tightened around the knife, but she didn't move. She let the silence stretch, a weapon in itself. "I'll be back," he snarled, his civility gone. "With paper, and with the sheriff, if need be." His footsteps crunched away. The next morning, Eliza didn't wait. Resolve, cold and clear, replaced her fear. She hitched a mule to a small cart, bundled Rose beside her, and rode into town. She didn't go to the sheriff. This wasn't his fight to win for her. This was her claim to stake. She went straight to the town ledger office, where Eleanor Vance was already waiting, a quiet nod on her face. "I thought he might show," Eleanor said, holding out a folded, yellowed paper. "Your husband had something Silas never did, a conscience, and he was meticulous." The paper was a receipt, a paid-in-full receipt for the debt on the land, witnessed, signed, and sealed a month before Daniel's death. "He gave it to me to hold," Eleanor explained, "in case anything ever went wrong." Eliza stared at the paper, speechless. The breath she hadn't realized she was holding exhaled in a long, shaky sigh. When Silas Kane returned 2 days later, Sheriff Blackwood was with him, as promised. But Cole wasn't there as an enforcer. He was there as a witness. "She's a squatter on my land, Sheriff," Silas declared, waving a piece of paper. Eliza stepped out of her now-finished doorway, the paid receipt held firmly in her hand. She didn't say a word. She just handed it to the sheriff. Cole read it slowly, his expression unchanging. Then he looked at Silas, his eyes as cold as a winter morning. "This paper," he said, holding up Eliza's receipt, "is dated, witnessed, and sealed by the circuit judge. Your paper," he said, glancing at the one in Silas's hand, "is a bill of sale for a debt that no longer existed. You bought nothing." Silas's face contorted with rage. "This is a trick, a woman's trick. The only trick I see here, Mr. Kane," Cole said, his voice dropping to a dangerous low, "is you trying to defraud a widow of her property. I suggest you ride out of Crimson Creek now, and don't come back." Silas stared from the sheriff's cold face to Eliza's defiant one. He saw no fear there. He saw a fortress. He spat on the ground, turned, and stormed away. Cole watched him go before turning back to Eliza. The official mask was gone. In its place was a raw, unguarded admiration that made her heart ache. "I told you," he said softly. "You're brave and dangerous." "I'm a mother," she corrected him, her voice steady. "There's no greater danger than that." He stepped closer, closing the distance between them, until he was standing on her doorstep. He reached out, his calloused fingers gently brushing a stray piece of sawdust from her cheek. The touch was electric, a bolt of lightning in the quiet afternoon. A wild, untamable current flowed between them, a love born not of courtship and flowers, but of fire, dust, and survival. "You didn't need me to save you, Eliza," he murmured, his stormy eyes searching hers. "No," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "I didn't." "Good," he said, a slow, genuine smile finally breaking across his face. "Because I have no interest in saving you, but I would be honored to stand with you." Part 6. A home called Defiance. Silas Kane never returned. Word of his defeat spread faster than a prairie fire, and this time, the town didn't just whisper. It spoke. The story of the widow who faced down the serpent became a local legend, a piece of Wild West history in the making. 2 days later, Jedediah Stone came by with a wooden sign he'd carved himself. It didn't say the Ward place. It said, simply, Defiance. "Seems more fitting," he grunted, a rare smile on his face. Eliza stared at the name, heavy with everything she'd earned, everything she'd endured. "It is," she agreed. They hung it above the gate together. With the land secured and the cabin standing firm, a new kind of work began. It started with the older girl who'd been watching her goats, the one whose father drank his wages away. Eliza invited her to stay. Then came the widow with twins who hadn't smiled in months. Soon, her home became a place where the lost drifted in without knocking. Quiet girls with dirt on their cheeks, mothers with bruised eyes, men too tired to explain why they had nothing left but a name. Eliza didn't ask for their stories. She handed them a task, a place to sit, and bread if she had it. What they gave back was something no coin could buy. Trust, community, a circle of second chances. These were the Wild West talbes, being written not in books, but in shared meals and quiet acts of solidarity. One evening, as the sky turned to pink and fireflies began to stir, Cole lingered after the others had left. He leaned against the porch railing, watching as Rose, now a toddler, chased chickens across the yard. "You ever think about leaving?" he asked, his voice quiet. "Going somewhere easier?" Eliza looked out over the land she had tamed, at the fence she had rebuilt, at the people who had begun to call her name not as gossip, but as a call for help. "I think," she said slowly, "that for the first time in my life I have something no one can auction off, burn down, or carry away." She turned to him, her eyes clear and bright in the twilight. "This is mine, Cole, every inch of it." He didn't move, but the intensity in his gaze deepened. The love between them was a wild thing, not meant for soft words and parlors. It was a thing of shared horizons and mutual respect, a silent understanding that they were two halves of the same stubborn, defiant soul. He walked over to her, taking her work-roughened hand in his. He didn't offer her a ring or a promise of an easy life. He offered her the only thing that mattered. "Then I'll stay right here with you," he said. "And God help anyone who tries to take it." He lowered his head and kissed her. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was fierce, passionate, a culmination of every unspoken word, every shared glance, every silent battle they had faced. It was a kiss that tasted of dust and pine and the wild, untamable spirit of the West. It was the sealing of a pact, a promise of a love as strong and enduring as the mountains themselves. That night, as she tucked Rose beneath a quilt sewn from old flour sacks, Eliza whispered a truth only the firelight could hear. "You weren't born into safety, my love, but I promise you will grow up in it." No man had handed her this life. No mercy had delivered it. She had carved it from pain, stitched it from ruin, and named it Defiance. The town of Crimson Creek never built a statue for Eliza. Her name was never carved into the church wall. But they remembered her. Years later, when strangers asked who first gave that place its backbone, they wouldn't just tell stories. They would point to the thriving community at the edge of town, a place called Defiance. They spoke of the widow who arrived with nothing but a baby and a spine forged in fire. They told of how, with no man behind her and no promise ahead, she built a life and a love that no one could ever take away. She proved that the most powerful legacy isn't what you're given, but what you refuse to surrender. Her story became one of the most powerful Wild West stories of the territory. Thank you for joining us for these Wild West talbes. If you believe in the power of resilience and want to support more stories from our shared Wild West history, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to Wild West Stories for more.